A calculator gives you the number 2.32 followed by 13 zeros and then 3. Should you report every digit? Does that long result mean the calculation is extremely accurate? And why might another system display the same value as 2.32? To answer those questions, we need to understand decimal precision. In everyday use, decimal precision describes how finely a number is expressed. A value shown as 10.5 is written to one decimal place. A value shown as 10.50 is written to two decimal places. The first decimal place represents tenths, the second represents hundredths, and the third represents thousandths. Mathematically, 10.5 and 10.50 are equal, but their presentation may communicate different information. In a measurement, 10.50 might suggest that the value was recorded to the nearest hundredth. In a financial report, the trailing zero might simply be required formatting. So trailing zeros can communicate precision, but only when the data contract explains what they mean. This leads to an important distinction. Decimal places, significant digits, precision, resolution, and accuracy are related, but they are not interchangeable. Decimal places count digits to the right of the decimal point. Significant digits count the digits that communicate meaningful detail about the value. For example, 12.30 contains four significant digits. The zero matters because it communicates the reported level of detail. In 0.004560, the leading zeros only locate the decimal point. The significant digits are 4, 5, 6, and the final zero. Resolution is the smallest increment that a system can measure, record, or display. A price feed with a resolution of 1 cent records changes in increments of 0.01. It cannot tell you whether an underlying value was 10.004 or 10.006 if both are stored as 10.00 or 10.01 under its rounding rule. Accuracy describes how close a value is to a defensible reference or true value. In measurement science, precision often describes repeatability, whether repeated measurements are close to one another. A process can be precise but inaccurate. Imagine a scale that always reports exactly 1 kilogram too much. Its readings may be highly repeatable, so they are precise, but they are not accurate. When programmers and database designers discuss decimal precision, they may use the word differently. In many decimal database types, precision means the total number of digits, while scale means the number of digits after the decimal point. For example, a decimal field with precision 10 and scale 2 can store 10 digits in total, with 2 digits after the decimal point. That leaves 8 digits before the decimal point. Its largest positive value is therefore 99,999,999.99. This technical meaning is different from saying that a measurement is precise. Context matters whenever you hear the word precision. Now consider rounding. Rounding replaces a number with a nearby number at a chosen level of detail. Before rounding, you must choose the decimal place and the tie-breaking rule. Suppose a calculated fee is 10.005 Saudi riyals and must be displayed to the nearest halala, or two decimal places. Under half-up rounding, the result is 10.01. Under another rule, such as half-even rounding, the result at an exact tie can be different. Half-even rounding sends a tie toward the nearest result whose final retained digit is even. It is often used to reduce systematic upward or downward bias across many rounded values. Neither rule is automatically correct for every financial system. The required rule may come from a contract, accounting policy, tax rule, exchange specification, payment network, or software standard. The important point is to name the rule instead of assuming everyone uses the same one. Rounding is usually a presentation decision, but sometimes it is part of the calculation contract. If a calculation does not require intermediate rounding, keep the validated internal precision through the calculation and round once at the final reporting boundary. Repeatedly rounding intermediate results can accumulate error and can produce a different final answer. However, some real workflows explicitly require rounding at particular steps. In that case, intermediate rounding is not a mistake. It is part of the method. The correct question is not simply, should we round? It is, what rule applies at what stage and for what purpose? We also need to separate decimal precision from computer floating point precision. Most common programming languages store ordinary numbers using binary floating point. Binary floating point represents numbers using powers of 2. Many simple decimal fractions, including zero point 0.1, cannot be represented exactly as a finite binary fraction. Imagine that the computer has a row of special buckets. Each bucket can be only empty, which means 0, or full, which means 1. The buckets are worth 1 half, 1 quarter, 1 eighth, 1 16th, and 1 32nd, with every new bucket worth half as much as the one before it. To build 1 tenth, 1 eighth is too large. We fill 1 16th and 1 32nd, making 0.09375. Close, but not exact. Smaller buckets keep narrowing the gap, but the pattern never finishes. A real computer has a finite row, so it eventually stops and keeps the nearest value it can represent. The mathematics is fine. The computer simply ran out of binary buckets. Those buckets are the idea behind IEEE 754 binary floating point. In the common 64-bit format, called binary 64 or double precision, 1 bit stores the sign, positive or negative. 11 bits store the exponent, which moves the binary point and controls the scale. 52 stored fraction bits describe the significant digits. With the normally implied leading bit, that gives 53 bits of precision. Values such as 1 tenth are rounded to the nearest available 53-bit pattern. IEEE 754 also defines arithmetic rounding and special values such as positive and negative infinity and not a number. An implementation can use hardware, software, or both. The standard makes the behavior portable, but it cannot make an endlessly repeating binary fraction exact. That is why a computer may calculate zero point 0.1 plus zero point 0.2 and internally produce something like zero point 0.3, followed by 15 zeros and then 4. The computer has not suddenly discovered a more precise financial value. The extra digits reveal a tiny representation difference created by approximating decimal fractions in binary. The same issue explains results such as zero point 0.3, followed by 15 nines, when the mathematically expected value is zero point 0.4. In our absolute deviation example, subtracting a center of 3.6 from a value of 4 should produce zero point 0.4. A binary floating point system may store a nearby representable number instead. For presentation, zero point 0.4 is normally the honest result, but the system should not blindly replace every small difference with 0. A tiny difference may be representation noise, or it may be a genuine business difference. The distinction must come from the data's units, resolution, and rules. Floating point spacing also changes with magnitude. As numbers become larger, the gap between adjacent representable floating point values generally becomes wider. This means a floating point format does not provide the same absolute resolution at every scale. For many statistical calculations, binary floating point is appropriate when its limitations are understood and numerical methods are designed carefully. For exact monetary accounting, systems often use a decimal numeric type or integer minor units. For example, 19.99 reals can be stored as 1,999 halalas. Integer arithmetic can then preserve exact minor unit amounts, but this approach still needs a declared currency and scale. Not every currency uses 2 minor unit decimal places, and prices, interest rates, exchange rates, tax rates, and cryptocurrency quantities may require more precision than payment amounts. Decimal arithmetic can represent base 10 fractions such as zero point 0.1 exactly within its configured precision. But decimal types are not infinitely precise. They have limits, rounding rules, and overflow boundaries too. Choosing a decimal type does not eliminate the need for a precision policy. Displayed precision and internal precision should therefore be treated separately. A system might calculate an interest rate using 10 or more decimal places, store an auditable decimal result, and display it as 4.27%. The displayed value is suitable for a human reader, while the retained value supports later calculations and reconciliation. At trading scale, a tiny rounding difference can become real money. A difference of 0.00231 across 18 million trades totals 41,580 currency units. So never assume it is immaterial. Store contractual trade and settlement amounts in exact decimal or scaled integer form. Then compare them with the broker's cleared cash. Put an unexplained difference in a reconciliation clearing account only while you investigate it. Once the cause is known, clear it under the entity's documented policy. For example, transaction cost, trading gain or loss, or another appropriate operating account for a genuine settlement rounding amount. Use foreign exchange treatment only when currency translation caused the difference. A systematic or material discrepancy must be corrected and its control failure investigated, not quietly written off. IFRS and United States GAAP do not prescribe one universal rounding account name. They require consistent policy, faithful reporting, error correction, and materiality judged from both amount and context. Round for presentation and reconcile the retained ledger to broker cash every day. But retaining more digits internally does not create more knowledge. If the source data were only measured to the nearest whole unit, showing 12 decimal places creates false precision. A calculator can produce extra digits even when the inputs cannot honestly support them. Precision cannot repair inaccurate, biased, stale, incomplete, or incorrectly interpreted data. Suppose four measurements are 9.9, 10.0, 10.1, and 10.0, compared with a reference of 10. Their average sign error is 0 because positive and negative errors cancel, but their mean absolute error is 0.05. Reporting only the zero bias would hide the individual measurement errors. Now suppose every reading is rounded to the nearest whole number. All four might appear as 10. The recorded data would look perfectly repeatable, but variation below the recording resolution would have disappeared. More consistent looking decimals do not necessarily mean a better measurement process. Precision also affects comparisons. With exact integer or controlled decimal values, exact equality may be appropriate. With binary floating point results, exact equality can fail because two mathematically equivalent calculation paths may end at slightly different representable values. A tolerance defines how much difference is accepted. Under a simple absolute tolerance rule, two values are considered close when their absolute difference is no greater than the declared tolerance. But a tolerance is a policy, not a magic correction. It must have a unit and a reason. A tolerance of 0.01 might be reasonable for a cent level reconciliation, but it could be far too large for a small interest rate and far too small for a large statistical estimate. Relative tolerance can help when values span very different magnitudes because it scales the allowed difference relative to the values being compared. A machine precision guard handles tiny representation noise. A business tolerance represents an accepted real world difference. Those are not the same thing. A machine guard should never silently turn a genuine one tick price difference into equality. Threshold decisions require special care. Imagine approving a transaction when a ratio is at least 0.80. If the unrounded ratio is 0.7996, displaying it as 0.80 does not necessarily mean the threshold was reached. Unless the governing rule says otherwise, calculate the decision using the retained value and round only the displayed result. This is why rounding must not be fed back into later arithmetic or threshold logic without an explicit reason. When designing or reviewing a financial calculation, ask 6 questions. What does the value represent, and what is its unit? What resolution does the source actually provide? Does precision mean decimal places, total digits, repeatability, or floating point capacity in this context? Which numeric representation is appropriate? Binary floating point, decimal arithmetic, or integer minor units? What rounding rule applies, and at which stage? Finally, what tolerance or comparison rule is justified by the instrument, currency, measurement process, or business contract? Decimal precision is therefore not just the number of digits after a decimal point. It is a contract connecting the source data, the numeric representation, the calculation, the rounding rule, and the final display. The safest principle is simple: calculate with appropriate internal precision, round at a declared boundary, preserve the original value when auditability matters, and display only as many digits as the information can honestly support. Next, rounding rules in financial software turns these policies into implementation decisions. Continue at thefintechbuilder.com.